My name is Lucas, and I'm an engineer on Google Web Designer. In this video, I'll show how to create dynamic ads. Dynamic ads include content that is pulled from a data feed when the ad is served. This allows the ad to be customized to the person viewing it. I'm starting with a simple ad that contains 2 images and a headline, and I'll use the feed to set the source for each image, the headline text, and the headline color. I start by going to the Dynamic panel, and in the Bindings tab, I press this plus button. I first have to tell Google Web Designer what fields are in the feed. This is also called the feed's schema. The set of schema that are available depends upon the ad environment. This ad is for display in Video 360, which includes both predefined standard schemas and custom schemas that you can create using Studio. For now, I'll use a standard schema. I'm now ready to add bindings. For each binding, I specify an element, a property on that element, and a field in the feed that is providing a value for that property. I'll start with the text. I choose the text element, I select its content, and then I see a list of all the fields in the feed, and I pick this one. I'll add another binding also to the text element, but this time I will set its color. And then I'm ready to move on to the images. The feed contains a list of products, and for each product, there's information like a description, an image URL, and a price. I want the image URL, so I select this field, and then I specify the index of the entry I want to use. I want the first entry, so I leave the index at 0. It may seem surprising that the index of the first entry is 0 instead of 1, but that's just the convention for this kind of data. Finally, I add a binding for the source of the second image. Once again, I select the image URL, but this time I increase the index by 1 to use the next entry in the list. Now I see all my bindings in the Bindings panel, but it's still not clear that it's worked correctly because on stage I just see the default document content. To get a better preview experience, I switch to the Sample Data tab. For every schema, we provide a set of default sample data that can be used for preview. If I select that data, I see it rendered on stage. This data is only for preview. It is not saved with the ad when it's published. And in a separate video, we show you how to build the real feeds that you use when your ad is served. This default is only a starting point. You probably want to customize the sample data for the ad you're building. And one way to do that is through this editor. Here, for example, I will set different headline text. In this editor, you can also add entries to lists, in this case a new product, and you can delete or copy existing entries. If I save my changes, I see them on stage. I can also edit sample data directly on stage. For example, here I'll use the text tool to change the headline, and I can also swap in different image assets. If I switch back to the default document, I see that it is unchanged. You can use multiple data sets when previewing your ad. If you have a data set already somewhere in a file, you can import that file into Google Web Designer. You can also create a new empty data set and build it up from scratch. And finally, you can copy and paste existing data sets, which I'll do now. First, I'll rename it, and then I'll select Duplicate from the context menu. And then I'll swap in a different image. I'll do the same thing, but this time I will change the color of the text. And I'll also change the content. You'll notice that when I commit the change, the text is fit to its container. That's because by default, all bound text has text fitting applied to it. If you don't want this behavior, you can turn it off in the text panel. So I now have an ad that has 4 bindings and 3 sample data sets, and if I preview the ad in a browser, I can see all the variations in one place. If you're building more than one ad that uses the same kind of data, you may want to share sample data between these ads, which you can do through our sample data library. To add data to the library, in the right-click menu, choose Add to Library. I'll now open up another ad that has a different structure but uses the same kind of data. So here's an ad that contains a simple animation. In the Sample Data tab, I'll use this button to open up the library. I see that sample data set that I had just imported, and I can now add it to this document and use it here for preview. I want to finish up by talking about a more advanced use case where we apply a transformation to the feed data before it's used. Here I have a swipe gallery, and I wanted to show an image for each product in the feed. As usual, I start by selecting a schema, and then I choose the swipe gallery and its images property. And now I want to get the image URL for each product. I start by selecting the product list itself, and then I go to the Filters tab in this editor. This provides a set of simple transformations that you can apply to the feed data. Here I pick one called Pluck and Join, which selects a field from each entry in the list and joins them together using commas. If I now look at the swipe gallery in the Property Inspector while I'm previewing sample data, I can see that it has a list of all of these images. And if I preview it in a browser, I see that it works like we expect. You can apply more than one filter to a binding. For this binding, for example, let's say that I want to show at most 3 images. I change that first filter so it truncates the list if it has more than 3 entries, and then I add a new filter that once again applies Pluck and Join to this shortened list. And if I preview it in the browser, again it works as expected. That concludes this tour of authoring dynamic data in Google Web Designer. Thank you for watching.